Claire, I don't think your mic's on.
Okay. Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the Local Review Body of 25th of September 2020. I can confirm that this meeting has been properly called and is quorate. Can I please ask members to appoint a chair for the meeting, please?
Could I propose Jim Dempster?
I second that.
Councillor Dempster?
Yeah, happy to do that if our members want. Clear, yes. Apologies for that, folks. Can everyone make sure their telephones are either off or on silent, please? Thank you. Good morning, members. Welcome to the meeting of the Local Review Body on Friday the 25th of September. Claire, will you take us through the process for today, please?
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm we've got 5 members present, 3 on Teams being Councillors Fairbairn, Tate and Young.
Thank you, Claire. I'm happy to confirm that. I'm content that members are indeed joining the meeting on Teams. Therefore, can we go to... I have an item of urgent business which I intend to take as item 7A on the agenda, which has been circulated to members in advance of this meeting, and there are hard copies present for those people who are present here. Can I just confirm that everyone has had the papers sent to them and have had the opportunity to view them? I have. If any member hasn't, can you let me know, please? Councillor Martin.
Never received any papers, but I've seen them on the...
Not electronically?
Electronically only.
Okay. Did other members receive the papers electronically because they came from Tracy Zonko, I think, 2 days ago, on behalf of Derek Crichton?
In fact, we had a meeting, the meeting yesterday, full council meeting yesterday. We had finished, Elaine was just breaking for lunch, and we just went through the item before it was on the agenda when I heard the post, and it would just come through my letterbox after we'd done that item.
Can you hear me, Jim?
Can you...
Can't hear you. No. It's intermittent.
My apologies, folks. I'll start again. Ronnie Tate, have you had the opportunity to consider these papers? Did you get them electronically?
I did, Chair, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Fairbairn, did you get these papers and have the opportunity to look at them electronically, the papers received?
Yes.
Thank you. And John Young, did you receive papers electronically and have you the opportunity to view them?
I have, Chair, thank you.
Okay, then maybe Councillor Martin, you will have to declare an interest. Oh, no. So Councillor Martin has now confirmed he has had them electronically as well. That's fine. So we've all had an opportunity to look and consider these papers because it will be an agenda item that we will discuss at the end of the meeting. In that case, members, are there any declarations of interest to be made? Again, I'll maybe ask you individually. Councillor Martin? Councillor Tate?
No.
Councillor Fairbairn?
No.
And Councillor Young?
No, Chair.
Thank you, gentlemen. In that case, we'll move on to agenda item number 4. Edinard, 1 Maidland Place, Wigton. Refusal plan permission principle for election dwelling or dwelling house. Case number 19/1839/PIP. Claire, do you want to take us through the contents, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I confirm we now have 4 notices of review after you agreeing to take the urgent item. So in summary, in your papers, you've got for item 4, you've got the notice of review, report and handling, observations of the appointed officer, comments of the applicant's agent on the appointed officer, the planning application form, decision notice from Dumfries and Galloway Council, relevant extracts from the Dumfries and Galloway Local Development Plan 2, and photos of the application site and locality. The grounds of refusal are the proposed dwelling house on this restricted site would be cramped and would have a harmful adverse impact on the density and character and pattern of the area and be out of keeping with the general building pattern of the area and therefore be contrary to LDP2 policy OP1 and associated LDP2 draft supplementary guidance. The proposed dwelling house on this restricted site would give rise to a poor standard of residential amenity for occupiers and would be uncharacteristic of the locality, in addition to damaging the visual amenity of the area contrary to LPD2 policy OP1 and associated LDP2 draft supplementary guidance. The requested method of determination is on the basis of further written submissions and by means of an inspection of the land, which is subject to review. The grounds in the notice of review are, in summary, have provided additional relevant comparison to adjacent properties to demonstrate that the proposal will fit well with policy. A site visit is considered vital as it will provide members of the board an unequivocal evidence supporting the application. The reason for this review is that the planning department do not seem to have been able to accept the proposed build density for the site is less than many adjacent sites, and the development of the site would not lead to a form of a development which would be consistent with the surrounding environment. The case officer's report misrepresents the physical size of the illustrative footprint as over 33% of the plot size, which is only 25.5%, and this is obscuring the facts. The site convincingly represents an appropriate plot within the surrounding character of the plot layout, and the proposal actually concludes the integrity of the characteristic of Maidland Place locality. Both the original report and handling and the notes of review refer to the proposed dwelling house. This is shown as purely indicative. It has already been referred to in the submission as fairly generous for the plot at 82 metres squared. In the assessment of the proposal, the purpose of the application to establish the principle seems to be lost in that the indicative house has been fully accounted for in the rationale. Indicative house merely amplifies the opportunity here in the examples of situation as previously described. It would result in a less dense build-up of the site compared to 2/5 of the adjacent site, which do not represent a majority of the characteristic of the surrounding area. I hope the LRB panel might agree that the weight of opinion based on the indicative proposed dwelling house is unbalanced and represents a unfair judgment of the application in terms of build density and maintaining the character and established scale of the immediate locality. You have the relevant development plan policies in your papers being OP1, OP2, H1, IN8, IN9, T2 and the extract from the LDP2 draft supplementary guidance. The main issues that the LRB may wish to consider are: does the proposal comply with the terms of the development plan policy? In particular, does the proposal meet with the terms of LDP policy H1 in principle? And turning to the size of the site and the terms of LDP2 policy OP2 and associated supplementary guidance. Would the proposed dwelling house on this site be cramped? Further, would it have a harmful impact on the density, character and pattern of the area? Would it be out of keeping with the general pattern of the area? Would it be contrary to the terms of LDP policy OP2? Would a proposed dwelling house on this site give rise to a poor standard of residential amenity for occupiers? If so, would this be uncharacteristic of the locality? Would it be damaging to visual amenity? Would the proposal be contrary to the terms of LDP2 policy OP1 and associated supplementary guidance? If it is not considered that the proposal accords with the terms of the development plan, are there a set of material considerations of sufficient weight to justify departure from the terms of the development plan? If so, what reasons would members give for such a decision if it was considered that the proposal departs from the terms of the development plan? So, having outlined the documents within your papers, it now falls to the LRB to determine whether it has sufficient information to consider the review. It's confirmed that there will be no representations from any party here today. You have the following options for this and the following cases. You can decide if you have sufficient information before you to determine the review today. Request further information in the form of written representations. The LRB would be required to state precisely the information it was seeking and who would provide it. Resolve to hold a hearing, again specifying who would be invited to speak and on what matters. Resolve to hold a site visit, accompanied or unaccompanied. This can be done in conjunction with any of the above, but would obviously not allow a decision to be made today. If the local review body resolves that it has sufficient information and no further procedure is required, then the local review body has the full powers to uphold, reverse or vary the determination. The decision notice would include a statement of the terms in which the planning authority has decided the case reviewed. You have a planning advisor present at your meeting. He is here to assist for these items. It is confirmed he has not had any involvement in this case and was not the case officer or the appointed officer for the application. He is here purely to provide independent advice as needed on matters of planning, policy, law or process to the local review body. So if members are clear and no further clarification is required, I will ask the Chair now to lead the debate and in the first instance to lead the LRB through the agenda papers together to decide if you have sufficient information before you to make a determination today.
Thanks very much, Claire. And I'm in members' hands now whether they wish to do these documents page by page or section by section. I'd be happy to take proposals on which method members prefer. Councillor Martin.
Prefer section by section.
Any member of the local review body have any alternative view? In that case, then, we will proceed on a section by section basis. So, initially, we have the notice of review and related documents, pages 13 to 21. Councillor Martin? Yes, photographs or images will be available. Do the members want to see them at the start or when we go through the process? You want to see them at the start, okay. In that case, before we go any further, we have images, I think, from both the case officer and the applicant or agent. Is that right, Mr. Sutty?
Thank you, Chair. These are actually just photos by the case officer. There are photos within your papers which were taken by the agent as part of the drawings. So if you want to run through the slides, please.
Thank you, Mr. Sutty, whenever you're ready.
These are exactly the same photos that you have on page 89 to 91 of your agenda. So the first shows Edinard at 1 Maitland Place in Wigton, which is the application site. The existing building there, as you can see, is a single-storey property, although there is a dormer to the rear. And on the next slide, you get a view along Maitland Place with the application site sitting behind the Lalandi hedge there in the centre of the photo. And the next slide is looking back down the other way towards Station Road. So the application site sits beyond the hedge there on the right-hand side. And the next slide is taken within the garden, looking northwards. So the application site is there, right, then filling the entire slide, where the proposed house would sit within that land there. You can see it's mainly enclosed by the hedge on two sides, open on the south side, but there is also a listed wall, which you can see just on the left-hand side. And the next slide is from the far end looking south towards the actual house that's there on site at the moment. That way you can see there is a dormer to the rear in that photo. And the final slide is just an aerial view of the area which the case officer has taken to actually show the density surrounding the area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sutty. Does any members have any questions on the images presented or any further clarity before we proceed? In that case, okay. In that case, we'll proceed. We have the contents. Notice of review and related documents, pages 13 to 21. Does anyone have any questions or observations on these documents?
Can I say something, Jim? Ronnie T.
Certainly, Ronnie, yes.
Yeah, I'm just looking at page 21 here, actually, on this site. And the area, you know, we've got area, house, garage, area occupied. There's very little difference in the density of the actual houses that sits in Maitland Place, Ednard, and opposite Hillcrest. So I'm just asking what the problem is with the size of the house compared with the size of the site, because it's very similar to the rest of the houses in that area. And on page 21 also, you know, when you look from the aerial view onto the various sites, you know, there's quite a lot of density. There's a lot of houses quite close to each other on that as well. So I'm just asking what the problem is with the densities question on this.
Again, the officer's observations are contained within the papers, but I'll ask David Sutty just to rehearse them for you and for other members to be absolutely sure of what the officer's opinion is and the basis on the refusal by delegated authority. David, can you help us, please?
Thank you, Chair. This is probably contained within the second section that you'd have been moving on to in the report and handling. But just to preempt that, the case officer and the appointed officer have obviously considered this, and they have concerns about how you could get a house within that site and the usual things that would be expected, such as normally an expectation is for, say, a 9-metre rear garden, the ability to get 2 cars off the road in and out and forward gear for parking, and to have the footprint of a house all within that area. Certainly the appointed officer and case officer are of the view that the site is too restricted. It's a bit of a catch-22. You could put a 2-storey house on there which would have a smaller footprint, but would then have greater impact on properties, given that the majority of them are single-storey or 1.5-storey around there. So there would be amenity issues if you had, and visual amenity issues if you had a 2-storey property there. Single-storey property obviously has a larger land take, and therefore the appointed officer and case officer have concluded that the site is too small to be able to satisfactorily accommodate even a modest house within that site and have the required amenity space and parking space. And that's basically the summary of why they put it up for refusal.
Thanks very much, Mr. Sutty. Bearing in mind that David Sutty reminded us that this is on the next report on handling. John Young wants to speak. Is it on the papers, pages 13 to 21, Councillor Young, or is it in the next agenda item? That...
No, it is, Chair. It's page 19. The agent quotes 2 areas there. The plot size of 321 square metres and the potential house front base of 82 square metres. Has that 321 square metres been verified independently, or is that just the agent's figures?
Mr. Sutty, can you help us?
As far as I'm aware, that's the plot size that the agent has submitted. So 321 square metres is what I've read this as. Clearly he is correct in as far as that if you do have a footprint house of 82 square metres, I also make that 25.5%. I think reading from the further on in this, the response from the appointed officer, it was because there were no actual written dimensions on the plan, it is difficult to be 100% certain that is the area. But the case officer has clearly gone through and done her own calculations, and that was where I think she came up with a slightly different figure. But certainly I concur with if you have 82 square metres, it is 25.5% of 321.
John, you content with that response?
Content, Chair.
There is one observation I'd like to make, and maybe ask Mr Sutty to help us. Given it's a planning application in principle, there's no set footprint, are we in a position to constrain a site to the 82 metres square that's referred to in the document if we happen to want to support this application, or is it simply down to officers once the planning application in principle is approved to then deal with the application as and when it's presented? Because clearly, if we agree planning in principle, we have determined that a house can indeed be introduced into that site.
Thank you, Chair. I think the really important word is on page 21, where it says indicative house position, occupying 82 square metres. So it isn't marked as indicative. Therefore, all that you're technically being asked to consider is the principle of a house within the site. Is it possible to do that? It would be open to yourselves as a panel, if you wish to approve it, to limit it to a house size of anything which you consider to be appropriate. It's just that the agent has submitted it showing an 82 square metre indicative footprint, but that is not binding on yourselves.
Thanks for that, David. Okay, John, so we're still on pages 13 to 20. Young Councillor Young and Councillor Tate have asked questions. I don't see anyone else looking to speak on that particular section, so members are content to move to the next section, which is the report on handling and related correspondence, pages 23 to 44. Are there any questions on that section? If there's not, we'll go to the observations of the appointed officer on the applicant's agent's notice of review, pages 45 to 49. Are there any questions on that section? If not, we'll go to comments of applicant's agent on observations of the appointed officer, pages 51 to 54. Are there any points or clarity required on that? If not, we come to the planning application form submitted on 25th November 2019. Excuse me. Associated plans and supporting information, pages 55 to 68. Are there any questions on that? If not, we come to the decision notice from the Dumfries and Galloway Council dated 5th of February 2020, pages 69 to 76. Any questions on that? Okay, we move on to the relevant extracts from the Dumfries and Galloway Local Development Plan 2, pages 77 to 85. Any questions on that? Okay, and finally, photos of the application site and the locality, which we've had and they're also contained within our papers, pages 87 to 91. Any questions on them? In that case, we move on to the grounds of refusal, pages 72 to 73. Claire has read them out. I don't propose to read them again, but you will see they're in two sections. The dwelling the dwelling house on the restricted site would be cramped and the proposed dwelling house on the restricted site would give rise to a poor standard of residential amenity for occupiers. Any questions on them two grounds of refusal? If not, the applicant has requested method of determination, page 18. The applicants have asked that the review be dealt with the following range of procedures: on the basis of further written submissions and by means of an inspection of the land which is subject to the review. And again, you've read the explanation by the applicant or the applicant's agent why they want a site visit. If members are proposing a site visit, I don't want to get into an exercise of discussing how that might be achieved. That will happen some way if that's what members of the LRB wish to happen. So, do we have enough information before us to carry on and determine this today, or do members feel they require a further written submission and you will have to determine exactly what that is, and then by means of an inspection of the land which is subject of the review? And I see Ronnie Tate looking to speak. Ronnie?
Yeah, I mean, I would. My thoughts on this, Chair, is that we should have a site visit on this one. I know the density levels are, I think, need discussed on site as well. So, you know, I'm proposing that we have a site visit.
Thanks for that. I've got John Martin. Unfortunately, we don't seem to be able to list people who indicate in any order because John Martin's present in the room. But I've got John Martin and then Doug Fairbairn. So, John Martin.
I think we've got enough information here for the not to have a site visit. I say I don't know what we would discuss at a site visit other than see that, but I think we've got enough information here. We've even seen over the satellite view, etc.
Thanks for that, Councillor Martin. I've got Councillor Fairbairn.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I've listened to that intently, and I've read through it as well. And there's a couple of wee concerns. I think Ronnie kind of highlighted it. But David addressed a certain aspect in relation to there could be a dwelling put in that particular location, but obviously certainly streamlined down a wee bit. But no, I would kind of go with Councillor Tate in relation to a site visit, because I feel that's a little bit of additional information we might require, and it might throw up something different on site. But
thanks for that, Doug. John Young, have you any views on this?
Yes, I've got views, Chair. Thank you. I would second Councillor Martin's motion. I think I have sufficient information to make a decision.
Thanks for that. Okay, in that case, we have Doug Fairbairn. Do you want to come back in, or has your hand just not been put down?
no, Chair, my hand's not been put down, sorry.
Thanks, Doug. Okay, in that case, Claire, we have a motion for a site visit from Councillor Tate, seconded by Councillor Fairbairn, and we have an amendment by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Young. We have sufficient information to determine this application today. So we'd like just to confirm what the motion amendment is, please, and then take us through the vote.
Okay, thank you, Chair. We have a motion proposed by Councillor Tate, seconded by Councillor Fairbairn, to have the further procedure of a site visit. We have an amendment proposed by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Young, that there is sufficient information to determine the case today. So, going to the vote then. To Chair.
Amendment.
Councillor Fairbairn.
Motion.
Councillor Martin.
Amendment.
Councillor Tate.
Motion.
And Councillor Young.
Amendment.
Amendments carry 3 votes to 2, so the case will be determined today.
Thank you for that, Claire, and thanks, members. So, in summary, we have provided additional relevant comparisons of adjacent properties. This is ground stated on notice of review to demonstrate that the feeling that this proposal fits well with policy, and the reason noted reviews that the planning department do not seem to have been able to accept that the proposed build density for the site is less than many adjacent sites, and the development of the site would not lead to a form of development which would not be consistent with the surrounding environment. We've all read these papers, I presume, so I don't, and Claire has already read these paragraphs out, so I don't propose to do that again. We move to development plan policies, pages 77 to 85. Are there any observations on that from any members? Okay. And then the main issues for the local review body to consider, and I maybe will read them just for the sake of it. Does the proposal comply with the terms of the development plan in principle? In particular, does the proposal meet the terms of LDP2 and policy H1 in principle? Turning to the size of the site in the terms of LDP2 policy OP2 and associated supplementary guidance, would a proposed dwelling house on the site be cramped further? Would it have a harmful adverse effect on the density, character and pattern of the area? Would it be out of keeping with the general pattern of the area? Would it be contrary to terms of LDP2 and policy OP2? Would a proposed dwelling house on the site give rise to a poor standard of residential meaning for occupiers? If so, would this be uncharacteristic for the locality? Would it be damaging to the visual amenity? Would the proposal be contrary to the terms of LDP2 policy OP1 and associated supplementary guidance? If it is not considered, the proposal accords with terms of development plans or other set material considerations of sufficient weight to justify a departure from the terms of the development plan. If so, what reasons would a member give for such a decision if it was considered that the proposal departs from the terms of the development plan? So, having outlined the documents with members' papers, now follows LRB to determine whether it is sufficient information to consider the review. It is confirmed that no representation from any party will be heard today. So we have determined that this will be decided, it will be determined today, and there are no representation. So the options to us are, we have sufficient information, we've already voted on that to enable us to determine the review today. There's been no request for further information in the form of written representations because that would need with it an explanation as to what that might be. We can resolve to hold a hearing again, specifying who will be invited to speak and on what matters. We can resolve to hold a site visit, but we've voted against, so that won't take place. And the LRB has sufficient information that no further procedures required, in the local review body has full powers to uphold, reverse or vary a determination. The decision notice will be included in the statement of terms in which the planning authority has decided the case review. David Sutty is with us. So if members have any further questions, this is now the time to do it. If members have proposals, this is now the time to do it, because we are now determining this application and we have already agreed not to hold a site visit. Councillor Fairbairn. Unless your hand's still up again.
I'll take it down. No, but I've nothing to add to that, no.
Thank you. Councillor Martin, looking to speak.
As I say, I think on principle, I think the size of the house is not, but my problem would be, as I say, regulations in the house, there's got to be room for 2 cars and a turning area. I just don't think with a house and a space for 2 cars, off-street parking would be, as I say, it would certainly, I would certainly think it would cramp it quite a bit if you're trying to get 2 cars, especially if you're taking them out forward.
Thanks for that. I have Councillor Young wishing to speak.
Thank you, Chair. You asked the planning officer if we could limit the footprint of the house. Could we also limit the height of the house?
I will ask, but I presume that's in our gift. Mr. Sutty?
The application is simply for a dwelling house. It doesn't specify if it is going to be a 2-storey or a single-storey, so the short answer is yes. You could consider, well, certainly I noticed the representation that came in had concerns about anything being more than a single story. So obviously you would have to consider if you want to have 2-storey, single story, or single story with attic space, so like dormers or things like that, which is akin to the parent house.
Thanks for that, Mr. Sutty. John, my concern would be, it would be really challenging to approve an application in principle and then keep refusing a construction because the height, size, shape or whatever And we also are always encouraged not to place conditions on approvals that are simply unenforceable. So I would worry that we would be doing something that would simply cause the applicant expense or constant to and froing. It is possible, and if that's what members are intent on doing, then we will have to go with that. But I'd be really concerned if we are establishing a planning in principle where we're going to restrict the size of the footprint, the size of the height, and at the same time encourage an applicant to go through the expense of submitting a formal planning application to the department. I've got Doug Fairbairn looking to speak. Doug?
I think there's something wrong with my hand this morning, Chair, because it's no me.
Apologies, Doug, that's okay. Councillor Martin.
Would there be any issue if we go with the recommendations of the LRB, the officer here, then someone coming back, the applicant coming back with a further application with the size, with sizes of what they would actually be going to build?
I suppose the question for the case officer or for David City is not the case officer, has not had any work with this application whatsoever. I suppose, if we refuse this today, I suppose John's question is, does that shut the thing down completely as far as an opportunity to develop this site goes, or would the applicant be entitled to come in with another more formal approach, including dimensions on a specific location, etc., etc.?
Chair, I think the issue which has vexed the case officer and the appointed officer in this case is the lack of information. It's looking for the principle of it, but you clearly shouldn't be, just as you were alluding to, attaching conditions which are tantamount to a refusal. So if you're approving it, but it's such a constrained house that you couldn't physically actually build a house of a single, it would just be too small, then really you should be refusing it, if that's what the concern is. Could they come back? Well, my take on this is if they came back with a detailed application that demonstrated that you could get a house on that site, meet all the usual requirements, then there would be no impediment to it. There's no policy justification for saying you can't have a house on this site if it meets all the criteria. The difficulty here is because it's just literally a red line around a site with an indicative layout, it's not proven at the moment to be satisfactory.
That's helpful, David. Thanks for that. So, members, do we have a proposal or proposals? If there are none, it will be assumed that we unanimously agree with the decision of the case officer, unless there are proposals to the contrary. I don't see any proposals to the contrary, so I assume that this is a unanimous decision to uphold the decision of the case officer and refuse the application in principle for Edenard 1 Maidland Place, Wigton, as set out in the report. Claire, can you just confirm the decision of this committee today, please?
Okay, thank you. I can confirm that you're refusing the planning permission in principle for Edenard 1 Maidland Place, Wigton. In this case, you would be varying the decision of the appointed officer, because the reasons in the papers would be the removal of the word draft before supplementary guidance in reason 1 and reason 2, because that supplementary guidance is no longer draft.
Mr. Sutty, is that correct?
That's correct. Sorry, I was going to jump in and explain that as well. It would have to technically be a vary decision here, because the situation has moved on. When it was refused, it was draft supplementary guidance. That was all adopted in March 2020. So it now actually forms part of the local development plan. And therefore, so technically what you're doing is issuing a refusal but deleting the word draft. That will similarly apply to the next two applications as well, because they both make reference to draft supplementary guidance that is now adopted.
Members happy with that wording? Thank you, members. In that case, we come again to the next item in our agenda, which is item 5, site to the rear of Beaconsfield Garage, Gas Lane, Kirkcudbright. Refusal of planning permission for erection of 2 semi-detached dwelling houses with integral garages and formation of access. The application number is 20/0006/full. Again, I don't think, Claire, you need to take us through the whole process again, or the members should be able to understand what was said and we just simply move to the documents that are set out in images.
That's totally for you, Chair. Could give you a very summarised version if you wish.
Summarised version will help, Claire, and then we'll go to images, please.
Okay, thank you. The grounds of refusal are, in this case, that the proposed by virtue of its character, general design, massing, scale and proportions is contrary to LDP2 policies OP1, OP2, H1, HE2 and the accompanying LDP2 supplementary guidance and draft supplementary guidance Kirkcudbright Conservation Area character appraisal, such that the proposal would not relate well to the character and appearance of the surrounding built environment. You've got, in summary, you've got your ground stated in the notice of review. The existing building to be demolished will not contribute positively to the character of the conservation area and is at present an eyesore in the context of the conservation area. The design of the proposed dwellings would contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding built and natural environment and is sympathetic to the surrounding buildings in the conservation area and would enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area. The proposed development would bring a vacant and unused site in the conservation area back into active use and provide 2 new dwellings within an existing settlement where services and facilities are readily available. The existing building is not listed and there's no historic interest. The finishes for the proposal were confirmed by the planning officer to be acceptable: slate roof, sash and case windows, brick to match existing. The building is set back from Gas Lane to allow compliance with Dumfries and Galloway Road Department parking provision. The applicant considers that a 0.9 metres boundary wall along the edge of the footpath would enclose the space to replicate further the footprint of the buildings within the streetscape which are sited along the footpath. The applicant wishes this to be considered to address the issue raised by the planning authority regarding layout, and the refusal at this point is unnecessary. The principle of housing on the site is acceptable and the proposed finishes are acceptable, and we would therefore hope to retain the existing natural and built features which contribute to the character of the area. The boundary wall is suggested to enhance the layout and there's no neighbour objections to the proposal. The comprehensive bat survey was carried out, no bats are found in the existing building, no objections from Council's Roads Department, Scottish Water, Council Archaeologist or Council Contaminated Land Officer. And the amended design takes on board comments from the Conservation Officer in terms of ridge height and use of graded coarse slate roof. And while the case officer makes reference to colours used in nearest buildings, we've noticed a modern garage building immediately adjacent to the site and a white modern render building with asbestos roof that had full planning permission granted for a change of use of a dwelling house. And the design of the proposed dwellings would enhance the character, appearance and setting of the existing conservation area and ask that appeal is looked upon favourably. Again, you've got all the relevant plans and you've got, in this case, main issues for the LIB to consider. Does the proposal comply in terms of development plan policy and principle? In particular, does the proposal meet with the development in the terms of LDP2 policy H1 in principle? In terms of proposed site and design, would the proposed dwelling houses meet with LDP2 policies OP2 and HE2 and related LDP2 supplementary guidance? Would the proposed relate well to the character and appearance of the surrounding environment by the character, general design and massing, scale and proportions? Would the proposal be contrary to the LDP2 policies OP1, OP2, H1 and HE2? and have not considered the proposal accords with the terms of the development plan. Are there any material considerations of sufficient weight to justify departure from the terms of the development plan? If so, what reasons would members wish to give for such a decision? You have the same procedures outlined to you previously in the earlier item, so if members are clear, it's for the Chairman to lead you through the papers and in the first instance to determine whether you have sufficient information.
Thank you, Claire. Just before we do that, we'll look at the images, I think. If you can give the images on this, please, David.
Thank you, Chair. Just at the outset, I should say that the first 4 photos were taken by the case officer, and then there's a subsequent 3 photos that have been submitted by the agent. The reason for incorporating those is that the agent did request back in April if he could have sight of an archived file for the vet store, which is shown in the photos, that got a change of use to a dwelling house in December 2006. Unfortunately, I was aware Kirkbank, the office where all these archive files are retained on CD-ROM, has been closed ever since due to COVID, so we haven't been able to allow him access into the building to view those on the CD-ROM. But to offset that, what we have done is have included the 3 photos which he had requested members see. So that's the latter 3. So the first one is just a view along Gas Lane. So you've got the application site, there's the single storey and the 2-storey buildings in the centre there. And the next slide shows the single storey building which would be demolished, and the next slide will show the 2-storey part which would equally be demolished, and then the final case officer's one is viewing back down Gas Lane in a southwesterly direction. So the 3 slides that the applicant's agent wished to show you is just from a little bit further along from that previous photo. So what he's demonstrating here is that building in the centre with the render and the asbestos roof, that did receive permission in 2006 for a change of use to a dwelling house. It was never implemented. That permission has long since expired. And I'd also have to point out in 2006, that's 2 development plans ago. So how relevant that is obviously a matter that members may wish to take on board. Next photo just shows the view from the other side of the vet store building, which you can see is still a store, hasn't been implemented. And the final slide is just a close-up of that gable and the asbestos roof. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. So do any members have any questions on the images?
Chair.
Doug, yeah, Doug Fairbairn, please.
David, could you go back a couple of slides, please? Maybe two back to the last one you showed, back 2. Right, the next one before that, please. Maybe the next one before that, sorry. That one there, yeah. Is that a dwelling house in there, David, with a light on, just out of curiosity?
David?
Hairdressers.
David?
I'll bow to local knowledge, so if Councillor Young says that's a hairdresser's, I'm happy to accept that.
John Young, can you just repeat it for the benefit of all members, please?
Sorry, that was a hairdresser's. Under COVID, I don't know if it still is a hairdresser's, but certainly before the lockdown, it was a functioning hairdresser's.
So for Councillor Fairbairn's benefit, it's a commercial unit and not a dwelling, is that correct?
As far as I'm aware, that's correct, yes. I'm quite confident. That's where my wife gets her hair done.
Thank you. Okay, so any other questions on the images? Doug's your hand just up again, or are you looking to come back in?
I've got to tie this hand down to a table chair. No, my hand's down, it should be anyway.
Good lad, thank you. Councillor Martin? Microphone, please.
On 109, there's a photo of the chip shop. What relevance is that?
David? I think someone's trying to illustrate that we have allowed changes on a more high-profile location. David, maybe you can help.
That's obviously a submission which the agent has put in, and I presume his justification for showing it is on page 105.
I think it talks at the representation from the applicant or agent says that's a tile roof, etc., in a conservation area, and many changes have been made to the property, and I think that's a defence for what they're hoping to do. Is that maybe close enough to an explanation, David? Yes. David says yes. Ronnie Tate, now we're still talking about images here and understanding what they are. We haven't gone on to the notice, review and report of handling. Questions will come at that time for them. This is simply about the images. Ronnie Tate. You're on speaker. You're on mute, Councillor Tate.
Sorry about that. Okay, I'm just looking. This is mainly a comment, really, Chair. Looking at the visuals, you know, they're fairly unsightly-like, and I would suggest that farther down the line, really, you know, it would be beneficial to the area that these visuals are gone. So that's just what I want to say now, Chair. That's a comment I've just made on the state and the graphics of these buildings. Okay.
Thanks for that. Yes, that's fine, Councillor Tate. Okay. If there are no other questions on the images, we will go to the contents of the papers. So we have the notice of review and related documents, pages 97 to 109. Do any members have any questions on them? Okay. We have the report on handling and related correspondence, pages 111 to 138. Do any members have any comment to make on them? Councillor Tate? Councillor Tate, yes, aye. Although you're still muted.
Sorry, Chair. I'll take my hand down.
Oh, that's you. So you want to look into speak, Councillor Tate? That's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Go on now.
Super. Councillor Fairbairn?
No, Chair, nothing to add to that.
Thank you. Next is the observation of the appointed officer. Oh, John Young. Sorry, John. Right. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. I just on page 119, page 119. Paragraph 4.7. The proposal is for a pair of matching semi-detached dwelling houses of suburban character which have been in keeping with a residential development on the edge of town. This is bang in the centre of Kirkcudbright. That's just the observation I wish to make. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, thanks. That's just clarification. It's not in the edge of town, it's in the centre. Okay, thanks for that. Much appreciated. Next we come to observations of the appointed officer on the applicant's notice of review, pages 139 to 141. Any observations or questions on that? Okay. Next to the planning application form submitted 3rd of January 2020, associated plans and supporting information, pages 143 to 184. Any questions or observations on that? Next is the decision notice from Dumfries and Galloway Council dated 6th of April 2020, pages 185 to 193. Any questions or observations on that? Councillor Young.
Sorry for butting in again, Chair. It's just a further observation. Gas Lane's a commercial lane. It holds a vet's, a mortuary, a post office building. And I think my personal view is that these properties are out of character for that particular location, as shown by it's the actual plans that were given in the elevations. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Young. We'll come to that in due course. This is simply a decision notice from the Council dated 6th of April. Next is relevant extracts from the Dumfries and Galloway Local Development Plan 2, pages 195 to 203. Any questions or observations on that? Okay, we've had the photos of the application site up on screen, and they are in your papers, pages 205 to 208. We now come to grounds of refusal, pages 189 to 190. These are set out in the papers. Claire has already read us through that. Are there any questions or observations on the grounds of refusal? In that case, we have the requested method of determination. The application is asked that the review panel, the review be dealt with the following procedures: by means of an inspection of the land which is subject of the review, and the submitted justification from the applicant in relation to why he considers a hearing is necessary is unfortunately absent from this submission. So, the applicant has requested that we hold a site visit. So we'll go on to that now. Then when we come to all the different options that's available to us, I'll remind you that the applicant has asked that. So the grounds stated in the notice of review, pages 109 to 114, and Claire has again read us a summary of that, so I don't propose to do it again. But that's pages 109 to 114. Are there any questions or observations on that? Okay. Next, we come to the development plan policies which are set out and they relate to the Dumfries and Galloway Local Development Plan LDP2, pages 195 to 201. If there are no questions on that, we come to the main issues for the local review body to consider. Does the proposal comply with the terms of the development plan in principle? In particular, does the proposal meet the terms of LDP2 policy H1 in principle? In terms of their proposed siting and design, would proposed development houses be meet with the terms of LDP2 policies OP2 and HE2 and related LDP2 supplementary guidance? In particular, would the development houses respect the general character of the buildings in the vicinity? Would the proposal relate well to the character and appearance of the surrounding environment by virtue of its character, general design, massing, scale and proportions? Would the proposal be contrary to LDP2 policies OP1, OP2, H1, HE2 and related supplementary guidance? And if it is not considered that the proposal accords with the terms of the development plan, are there a set of material considerations of sufficient weight to justify departure from the terms of the development plan? If so, what reasons would the member gives for such a decision if it was considered that the proposals depart from the terms of the development plan? That are the main issues for us to consider now. The options available to us, we can decide it's sufficient information before us to enable a decision to be made. We can request further information in the form of written submissions. We will need to state precisely what information we require and who must provide it. We can resolve the hearing again, specifying who will be invited to speak and on what matters. Resolve to hold a site visit, accompanied or unaccompanied. And if the local review body resolves that sufficient information that no further procedure is required, then the LRB has the full powers to uphold, reverse or vary a determination. The decision notice will include a statement of terms in which the planning authority has decided the case reviewed. And we have again a planning advisor, David Sutty, who has no involvement whatsoever in the application or determination of this application today. So, do we have enough information before us? Do we require a site visit, or do we need further information? And again, I'm open to members to determine which of these factors come into play. If no one has an observation, I will take it for granted that we have enough information before us today to make a determination. So unless anyone has a feeling to the contrary that they wish to present to members, I will take it as... Oh, Councillor Tate? You're on mute yet, Ronnie.
Sorry, Jim. Pass on that one.
Bang on now. So, have you something you wish to present to members, Ronnie?
No, I don't. No, actually, no, nothing.
Super, that's great, thank you. In that case, I take it then that we are all agreed we have enough information before us today. In that case, do members have any views other than the view presented by the case officer and determined by the case officer? Again, if no one has an observation to make, I will take it as given that this is a unanimous decision, that the LRB supports the decision already made by the case officer to refuse this application. If there are no alternative views, I will deem that's a decision, unanimous decision of this committee, and I'll ask Claire just to rehearse that, please. Claire?
Okay, thank you. I can confirm that the local review body are agreeing to refuse planning permission for the site to the rear of Beaconsfield Garage, Gas Lane, Kirkcudbright, for the same reasons as outlined in the papers. So you're varying, as was highlighted in the earlier item, you're varying the decision of the appointed officer because the guidance is no longer draft, so the omission of the word draft.
Thank you, Claire. Is that right? David City?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's in relation to supplementary guidance for the conservation area character appraisal.
Thank you. Thanks very much, members. We move on to agenda item 6, which is land at rear of Ken Lee, Balmaclellan, Castle Douglas, refusing and applying permission in principle for erection of dwelling house, reference number 19/179 I will start again. Reference 19/1796/PIP, 19/1796/PIP. Again, Claire, will you take us through the preamble, and then we'll get into the meat of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The grounds of refusal in this case are the proposed development is contrary to Dumfries and Galloway Local Development Plan 2, Policy H2 and associated LDP2 draft supplementary guidance on housing development in villages, which only permits the erection of new houses in designated villages in identified circumstances, and none of these circumstances apply. In particular, the proposal would lead to a form of ribbon development. This pattern of development is considered to be uncharacteristic of the wider settlement. The applicant has requested that the review be dealt with on a review of the relevant information provided by them without any further procedure. The grounds stated in the notice of review are, in summary, the proposed dwelling house will have significantly less impact compared to other properties built recently in the area. Specifically, the property at the top of the village was extremely visible from within the village and from the public road. This proposal is significantly more sheltered and in keeping with the surrounding buildings and hall, and would have minimal visual impact within the village and surrounding area. It is also significantly less impact than the new fabrication workshop that has been improved out with the village, which is on a greenfield site and is positioned away from any other buildings. Even currently, without a building, the site has been cleared. It's extremely visible from New Galloway. Also, planning permission in principle was approved for the erection of 3 dwellings on the site in May 2006, OP 20191, and also in January 2011. This application is applying for only 1 dwelling on the site. The site is served by an existing private way of the C41 public road, which is currently serves just 2 other existing properties which are positioned on the opposite side of the private road. It is therefore believed that this proposal does not constitute as a form of ribbon development and is not uncharacteristic of the wider settlement. The 2 previous proposals for 1 dwelling house were withdrawn due to concerns relating to the visibility from the private access of the public road due to the hedge at Kenley. However, this is no longer an issue as the hedge has been taken down by the new owners of Kenley. Also, the Council's road planning team leader had no objections with regards to access when they inspected the site. The neighbours have no objection to a single-storey dwelling house being erected on the proposed site. You've all the relevant development plan policies in your papers. So the main issues for the LRB to consider are: would the proposal lead to a form of ribbon development? Would the pattern of development result in an uncharacteristic of the wider settlement? Would the proposal be contrary to LDP2 policy H2 and associated LDP2 supplementary guidance and principle? How much weight would members wish to give to previous planning application history and the status of the site and previous development plans? If it is not considered that the proposal accords with the terms of the development plan, are there a set of material considerations of such sufficient weight to justify departure from the terms of the development plan? If so, what reasons would members give for such a decision if it was considered the proposal departs from the terms of the development plan? You've got the same procedures outlined to you as previously in the earlier items, so if members are clear, and again if no further clarification is required, I'll ask the Chairman now to lead you through the debate in the first instance to determine if you have sufficient information to make the determination today.
Thank you very much, Claire. Members are content. We will now ask David to show us the images relating to this application, please.
Thank you, Chair. Again, these are the same photos you have in your papers. The first slide shows a view up the private access track. You've got the village hall at the side, and there's two houses lie beyond that, so the application site is up on the left-hand side in the track. And the next photo is taken further along that track, looking back down towards the village. So the application site sits on the land to the right-hand side. And the next slide just pans across from that. So probably the key thing to note there is the slightly elevated nature of the land in comparison to the road and the adjacent properties, Kenley in particular. And the next slide should be just a further panning across, but in the application site, looking down towards Kenley. Again, you can see that it's loosely undulating and in a slightly raised position to some of the other nearby properties. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, David. Do members have any questions about the images that have been shown today? If not, we will go on to the Notice of Review and Related Documents, pages 213 to 221. Any observations, Councillor Tate?
Haven't got my hand up again, Jim.
Oh, I just saw your light flashing. I thought I was you in the process of indicating you wanted to speak. My apologies, and thanks, Ronnie. Okay, if there are no observations on that, we move on to Report on Handling and Related Correspondence, pages 223 to 241. Any questions or observations on that? Okay, members, we go on to the observations of the appointed officer on the applicant's notice of review, pages 243 to 245. Any questions on that? In that case, we move on to the planning application form submitted on the 6th of December 2019, associated plans and supporting information, pages 247 to 265. Any questions on that? Okay, we move on to the decision notice from the Dumfries and Galloway Council dated 17th of February 2020, pages 267 to 271. Any questions on that? We move on to the relevant extracts from the Dumfries and Galloway Council Local Development Plan 2, pages 275 to 283. Any questions on that? In that case, next the photo of the application site and the locality, pages 285 to 288. We've already had them on screen, but they're also in your papers within these pages. Okay, we move on to the grounds of refusal, page 270. and the proposed development is contrary to Dumfries and Galloway Local Development Plan 2 Policy H2 and associated LDP draft supplementary guidance on housing development in villages, which only permits the erection of new houses in designated villages and identified circumstances, and none of these circumstances apply. In particular, the proposal would lead to a form of ribbon development. This pattern of development is considered to be uncharacteristic of the wider settlement. So, the requested method of determination, page 218, the applicant has asked that the review be dealt with based on a review of the relevant information provided by them without any further procedure. If there is no observation on that particular point, we have the grounds stated in Notice of Review, pages 213 to 221. Claire has already read that out in detail, and they're in your papers, and I'm sure you've studied them. So if there's any observations on that, I'd be happy to have that now, members. In that case, we come to development plan policies, pages 275 to 283, which is the Dumfries and Galloway Local Development Plan LDP2, and it sets out the paragraphs or sections that apply. If there are no observations on that, we come to the main issues for the local review body to consider. Would the proposal lead to a form of urban development? Would the pattern of development which would result in a characteristic wider of the settlement? Would the proposal be contrary to LDB2 policy H2 and associated LDB2 supplementing guidance? How much weight would members wish to give to previous plan application history and the status of the site in previous development plans? If it is not considered the proposal accords with the terms of the development plan, are there a set of material considerations of such weight to justify a departure from the terms of the development plan? If so, what reason would members give for such a decision if it's considered that the proposal departs from the terms of a development plan? So these are the main issues for members to consider. It now falls to the LRB to determine whether it has sufficient information to consider the review. It has been confirmed that no representation from any party will be heard today. The options again are the same. Decide we have sufficient information before us to enable us to determine the review today. Request further information in the form of written representations. We will be required to state precisely the information it's seeking and who must provide it. Resolve to hold a hearing, again specifying who will be invited to speak and on what matters. Or resolve to hold a site visit unaccompanied or accompanied. This can be done in conjunction with any of the above, but would obviously not allow a decision to be made today. If the local review body resolves that there is sufficient information, that no further procedure is required, then the local review body has the full powers to uphold, reverse or vary a determination. The decision notice will include a statement of the terms in which the planning authority has decided the case reviewed. Councillor Tate, you'd like to speak. Followed by Councillor Young. You're muted, Ronnie.
I haven't indicated anywhere that I want to speak, Jim.
All right, Claire advised me you wanted to speak, but that's fine.
No.
It's Councillor Young. Thank you. Councillor Young.
I feel we have sufficient information to make a decision today, Chair.
And Councillor Martin has indicated he'd like to second that. Councillor Martin?
I would second that because I don't see what a site visit would do, because if you can see with the photos it would be a ribbon development if you go with the photos like without a site visit.
Thank you. Any member have any alternative view? In that case, this application will be determined today. Members, are there any views on this application? Again, if there are none, I will take it this is a unanimous decision of the committee to support the case officer's decision and refuse this application. If anyone has an alternative view, please indicate. Councillor Martin.
I've not got an alternative view, but just a bit. My only concern was we've got development, got outline development for before for 3 houses, and now, but that would be under other development plans. It wouldn't be under the development plans we've got now. It does Visway ribbon development, a ribbon development on that site. So whether, I don't know why, if that was when time when area committees decided planning or not, I don't know.
Mr Sutty, can you just give Councillor Martin some confidence that the decision we make today cannot be challenged on the basis of what's been said before, and whether what has been agreed before or determined to happen before, and whether or no it was indeed area committees at that time that allowed that particular site to be included in a previous plan?
Thank you, Chair. My understanding is that the original permission was a Stewardship Area Committee decision in May 2006. That was then subject to a further application, 2011. That expired in 2014. The plan allocation in the Stewardship Local Plan, which dates from 2006, was ST3, but then that was superseded firstly by LDP1 in 2014, and then obviously it's not been reinstated in any way in LDP2. So you're considering it under the policies which are applicable today, and there's basically the case officer and the appointed officer have said there's no policy support for it under the current development plan.
Just for absolute clarity, there's no recourse for any applicant on the basis that in the past that site was included for development?
It's a matter for yourselves to consider how much weight you wish to give to that, but as I've said, that expired in 2014, and you're considering it under the current LDP, and the LDP here clearly has a new policy in terms of H2, which excludes ribbon development. So you're considering it competently today.
Thank you. And then Councillor Martin has indicated that he is satisfied with that explanation. So unless any other member has an alternative view, Councillor Martin has endorsed the decision of the case officer, and it's a unanimous decision that we refuse this application. Claire, can you confirm the decision of the committee, please?
Thank you. I can confirm again the local review body have agreed to vary the decision of the appointed officer and refuse the planning permission for the same reasons as stated in the papers, again with the removal of the word draft. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Is that right, David?
Yes.
Thank you. We come on to the additional item that I have agreed to take, which is agenda item 7, 52 High Street, Dalbeattie, refusal of planning permission for alterations including widening of external stair and change of use of first floor office accommodation to form flatted dwelling. Application number 20/0378/4. The reason why this item is considered to be urgent due to the need for a decision is that at the time this planning application was refused, planning permission by the Council's appointed officer, the sole reason for refusing. Oh, Claire, can you deal with this for me, please? It's your duty.
Okay, thank you. So at the time this planning application was refused, planning permission by the Council's appointed officer, the sole reason for the refusal contrary to the terms of the development plan was informed by consultation responses from the Council's flood risk management team leader and SEPA that both raised objection. The appointed officer has very recently become aware that both of these consultees have been reviewed their position in relation to this proposal and that neither consultee now wishes to object. Given this fundamental change in circumstances, it is now suggested there is an urgency in having the previous decision to refuse planning permission refused by the Council's local review body as soon as possible, and this would enable planning permission to be issued should the LRB members see fit.
Okay, members. David, can you show us the images that are in the additional set of papers we received, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just for the record, I should clarify that I'm not the appointed officer, not the case officer for this one, but I have been involved in the case. But given the recommendation here, that doesn't cause any conflict of interest. So the first slide is just a view on the High Street, where the property involved is the first floor of the shop that's in the centre of the slide. The next slide moves around to the rear, so this shows the staircase element of it, and the next slide just pans across a bit from that, and the final slide is a view from the staircase just down into the backyard. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, David. Okay, we come to the index of contents. We have the notice of review and related documents. Are members happy to acknowledge we've received them? We have the report on handling and related correspondence. We have the observations of the appointed officer on the applicant's agent notice of review and further responses from SEPA and the Council Flood Risk Management Team Leader. Members have that. Planning application form submitted on 5th of March 2020, associated plans and supporting information. Decision notice from Dumfries and Galloway Council dated 28th of May 2020. Relevant extracts from Dumfries and Galloway Local Development Plan 2. Photos of application site and locality and grounds of refusal. We have these before us. We now have a situation where the Council Planning Officer has identified an issue, and if David can just again rehearse for us what the issue was and what the proposed amended decision is, I think that would be helpful to members of the LRB. David, can you just take us through that information, please?
Thank you, Chair. You obviously have a standard process in terms of going through the local review, which you can obviously decide if you wish to do that today. It is an urgent matter in as far as that really the fundamental ground for refusal, the sole ground for refusal really, is to do with flood risk. The site is undeniably identified in the 1 in 200 year medium flood risk on the SEPA flood map, so at face value the comments that were initially received appeared to be valid in terms of the effect that the change of use from the least vulnerable use of an office to the most vulnerable in residential would potentially put lives at risk in terms of residents and rescuers. So at face value, that was taken in good faith from the statutory consultees, and it was refused. However, more information has come to light on this, that the SEPA flood risk map is a high-level map. It covers the whole of Scotland, and SEPA are happy to accept when further, more detailed information identifies local reasons why it would not actually be at flood risk. Now, there was a survey which was done, and that had not been picked up by the consultees, and that data, there was a council survey which was done in 2015. So unfortunately now that has been raised by the applicant with the statutory consultees. They have conceded that in fact it isn't at risk, and therefore their objections are no longer valid. The only other thing to mention as well is that there is a fault in the case officer's report in as far as she mentions policy H1 on housing, which is correct, but failed to recognise that this is actually also subject to policy ED5 on town centres. Most commonly that will apply to large town centres such as Dumfries, but there is a town centre identified for Dalbeattie, and therefore policy ED5 should have been mentioned, and that does actually actively encourage the reuse for residential purposes at first floor level. So had that been included, that might have given more weight to the decision, and had that come before the LRB, that would have been the determining factor if there were still objections from the flood risk team. But given that they have now withdrawn their objections, there is no reason for this application to be refused, and you'll note the appointed officer is requesting that the members grant unconditional planning permission at today's meeting.
Given the information David has shared with us, do any members have any observations or questions? If not, are we unanimous as an LRB to overturn the current refusal and grant planning permission as set out in the officer's report. Councillor Tate, did you want to speak this time?
Yeah, just a comment again, Chair. You know, maybe in the future that we do not take basically the word of the flood prevention teams and SEPA at face value, actually, and we actually scrutinise it a wee bit more. That's just what I would want to say. That's me done.
Thank you. I'm sure, given the challenge this particular application has presented us, that officers will be quite conscious that we need to try and gain as much up-to-date information as we can when we're making a decision, and that's duly recorded. And thanks for that observation, Councillor Tate. So are we as a local review body, and I don't see anyone saying anything to the contrary, that we deemed that this application to be approved as set out in the new paper presented as item 7 for this agenda? Members content with that? Thank you. Claire, can you just confirm the decision of the committee? And I'll ask David Sutty if that's right.
Thank you. I can confirm that the LRB are reversing the decision of the appointed officer and are agreeing to grant unconditional planning permission for 52 High Street, Dalbeatty, for the alterations including widening of external stair and change of use of first floor office accommodation to form flatted dwelling.
Thank you, Claire. David, does that fit with the officer's new opinion?
That's correct, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Claire, officers and members, thank you very much for your attendance today. I have no other business. Thank you very much indeed.